Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my Pokemon TCG tier list heading into the 2023 World Championships next week, which will be held in Yokohama, Japan. Me personally, I finished in the top 16 ranked players in North America, so I will have an automatic day 2 invite, so I'm excited to be competing. And today we're going to be kind of going over my thoughts on the metagame and how it's shaping up heading into Worlds. But with that being said, if you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's hop into it. Alrighty, hopping into the tier list here, we're going to be starting off with some of the Arceus decks. First off, we have Arceus Aerodactyl. Arceus Aerodactyl, I think, is a tier 2 deck. Christopher Kemp, I believe, got top 32 at the most recent North American International Championships with a pretty cool Arceus Aerodactyl deck, and it has seen some competitive success recently, so I do think it deserves its spot in tier 2. I don't necessarily think it is the strongest Arceus deck, as I think pairing it up with things like Umbreon, Duraludon, and Giratina, even Flying Pikachu, are slightly better. But I do think that the deck is not bad by any means. Having the ability to also use Ancient Star instead of Starbirth is pretty cool against decks like Lugia. Being able to hit weakness against things like Arceus V-Star is also very, very nice. So you do have some decent type coverage right now in the metagame. However, I don't necessarily think Aerodactyl is overwhelming in any way, so I do think that it is a tier 2 deck. Arceus Duraludon, going to be the first tier 1 deck here. Arceus Duraludon is incredibly powerful as of right now. I think that Arceus Duraludon is one of the better counter decks in the format. Now, this is paired up with Umbreon as well. Being able to have arguably the best type coverage in the game is great. You have Duraludon, which is awesome against Arceus decks, along with, most importantly, Lugia V-Star as well. So there are just lots of nice uses, also versus Rapid Strike Urshifu as well. Umbreon is amazing into decks like Mew, VMAX, and Gardevoir. The deck kind of has it all. The only problem with this Arceus deck is consistency, especially towards the middle and late game, whereas something like Arceus Giratina has things like B-Barrel. So the consistency towards the middle to late game is a little bit shaky. However, the deck is very, very strong and has decent matchups across the board. I definitely could see it doing well at Worlds. Moving on to Arceus Giratina, I think Arceus Giratina is probably the best Arceus deck as of right now. It's not necessarily a counter deck like Arceus Duraludon is. Arceus Duraludon is very strong. However, it does have some really bad matchups against decks that it, might not necessarily be able to counter very well, like things maybe like Chen Pao or Lawson Giratina. Now, Arceus Giratina is just a solid deck. It's just a very, very strong deck, has decent matchups pretty much across the board, is able to abuse Iono and Judge along with Path to the Peak, arguably better than any deck right now in the standard format. So I do think that it deserves its spot near the top of tier 1, and I do think is the best Arceus deck as of right now heading into this event. Maybe for NAIC, Arceus Duraludon was a little bit better with all the Lost Zone toolboxes. However, I think that Arceus Giratina, although taking slightly worse matchups against decks like Lugia V-Star, also a worse matchup against decks like Urshifu and Teleon, and Lost Zone box is still kind of shaky as well. I do think the Iono path and just Judge path, just that kind of disruption just makes up for all of that, specifically against decks like the Arceus mirror matches and also versus Gardevoir as well. So Arceus Tina, very, very strong. I think it deserves its spot in that tier 1. Arceus Flying Pikachu, I think, is a tier 2 deck. We'll put that there. I think that Arceus Flying Pikachu is just solid. I wouldn't necessarily even say it's better than Arceus Aerodactyl. I think it's okay. Arc Umbreon, the list that Michael Catron used to get top 8 at NAIC, I think is relatively strong. I think it's better than some of these other Arceus decks. Being able to use Umbreon, it's pretty much more or less slacking as well. It's kind of just like an Arc slacking box deck, which I do think is pretty cool. Umbreon is great. To be able to control the field, also really good against, decks like Gardevoir and Mew. Argudra, Rayquaza, and Arc Regidrago, I think, are all tier 3, along with also Arceus Vulpix. You could put Arc Regidrago a little bit higher up, just because it did well in juniors, winning that international championship for NAIC, but I do think the deck is like It's not great. It's a little bit inconsistent, but when you get going, it can be very, very powerful. But the consistency issues are, kind of there. So I think that's a reason as to why it's in tier 3. All right. Moving on to Chen Pao now. We have both of the Chen Pao variants that have been seeing lots of success. We see Chen Pao Arceus. I think Chen Pao Arceus is quite good as of right now. Does pretty decent into the Arceus decks. Starbirth is absolutely amazing. It has pretty much an unlimited damage cap as well, and I do think is going to make waves heading into Worlds. It also doesn't really tie a whole lot, which is great, which is a big thing that is, I think, worrying players heading into Worlds. Playing decks like Lost Zone Toolbox or Gardevoir is that tie rate, and I do think that Chen Pao is one of the most aggressive decks in the format too. I'm going to put it probably below Arc-Umbreon. I think Arc-Umbreon might be a little bit better, but I do think it's better than both of those Arc decks. Palkia Chen Pao. This deck is very good. I think this deck is better than people give it credit for. I think I'm going to put it in tier 1. I think it's a bottom tier 1 deck, but it has been performing quite well. We saw one get top 32. I believe Anthony Perez got 32nd place with this deck, and the deck has been seeing more success online in tournaments as well. I actually got to sit down and play some games with the deck, and I was incredibly impressed with just how powerful it is. It has the ability to pretty much lock up games on turn 2 with crazy cross switcher knockout plays, and I do think that the deck is just genuinely really, really good as of right now. So we're gonna put Palkia Chen Pao at tier 1. That might be a surprise, but I think the deck is for real, and I definitely think is the better Chen Pao variant just because of how much more consistent it is. You do trade a little bit of power, but you gain so much consistency, it just ends up being worth it. Moving on, we have Lost Zone Toolbox, Turbo Lost Box specifically. I'm going to put it behind both of the Arceus variants. Deck is very, very strong. Being able to hit turn 1 Dragonite is absolutely incredible. The problem is that it does have shaky matchups against most of the Arceus variants. Arceus variants with Lost City are able to one-shot Dragonite and remove it completely from the game. Radiant Alakazam can be quite annoying to deal with, and Iono and Judge paired up with Path of the Peak as well can be quite a nuisance. Its Gardevoir matchup is also not as good as people might think. If the Gardevoir opponent is able to utilize Iono over and over again, and also cards like Cresselia. Those are some problems the deck has. On top of it, the tie rates are relatively high with Lost Zone, and that's something that players at Worlds might be kind of worried about, because in day 1 of Worlds, for example, ties are almost effectively losses because you have to go X2. So if there's 7 rounds, you have to go 5-2. If there's 8 rounds, 6-2, 9 rounds, 7-2. And ties don't really help out unless you're planning to go 5-0-3 or 6-0-3 or something like that, which at the World Championships is incredibly hard to do. So I think that the deck is tier 1. However, I don't think it is at the very top. I think it's kind of right now in that middle. We see another Force Seal Stone version. I don't really know exactly what this is. We're just gonna kind of leave that out of there because I think that pretty much is turbo anyways. But all right, moving on to Lost Box Moltres here, probably with the Kyogre. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of this deck. I think it's just slower, weaker Lost Zone Toolbox. The Moltres is admittedly nice versus decks like Mew VMAX and also Gardevoir. However, I think that the metagame has sped up so much that this deck does get kind of overwhelmed as well. So we're going to put it right there. Lost Zone Giratina. I think Lost Zone Giratina is near the top of tier 1. I think it is the best Lost Zone variant as of right now. Path of the Peak and Temple of Sinnoh are great inclusions in this deck. Path being very, very good, versus decks like Gardevoir, also Mew VMAX, Arceus, and more. It's just an amazing card, and if you do want to include Temple of Sinnoh, some people like the third path, which is totally understandable. That does help out versus some matchups like Lugia, but I think this deck has it all. It pretty much is Lost Zone Toolbox, except you lose a little bit of consistency. However, you improve all your Arceus matchups from slightly unfavorable to very favorable. You take good matchups against pretty much every Arc variant. Star Requiem is an absolutely insane attack as well. So I really do think that this deck is well positioned, especially heading into day 1, because it is the one Lost Box variant that also doesn't necessarily tie a whole lot, because you have the ability to accelerate the games very quickly with Tina, and you're able to finish them really, really quickly as well. I think this deck is great. I think it can beat anything in the format. The only issue that it sometimes does run into is consistency, as it is a little bit clunky at times, but I think deserves its spot in that tier 1. Lost Box Gudra, probably top of tier 3. I don't think the deck is great. I actually think our Gudra is a little bit better than Lost Box as of right now, just because it's a little bit more consistent. But I do think the deck is, relatively respectable. It could do well, but I don't necessarily have it on my radar. Single prize Kyogre and also Dragonite V Kyogre, so kind of the turbo Kyogre and single prize. I think the turbo Kyogre is a little bit better. We're going to put it at the top of tier 2. I just don't necessarily think that it is as good as turbo because it's a little bit more inconsistent, but it does gain some better matchups against decks like Arceus, for example. So we'll put Turbo Kyogre at the top of tier 2. The big problem with Turbo Kyogre is that it takes a much worse Gardevoir matchup than Turbo does, because Turbo has things like Boss's Orders, whereas the Dragonite Turbo Kyogre build typically can't fit it in. So the Gardevoir matchup gets significantly more spooky. So yeah, we'll put that right there. Single prize Kyogre, I think, is probably near the middle to bottom of tier 1 or tier 2 as well. These are kind of the same deck. You can either play the Kyogre Moltres or just single prize Kyogre as well. This is probably with Zamazenta, or I guess actually we have Zamazenta here as well. So yeah, I think that this kind of deserves its spot near the bottom of tier 2, maybe even top of tier 3. But Lost Box Zamazenta, I think, is top of tier 3. Charizard, bottom of tier 2. Sky Seal Stone, probably top of tier 3. And then this one, I guess we'll just put this at tier 3 if this is just another 4 Seal Stone box deck. So that's fine. Anyways, moving on to some of the other decks here, we have Turbo Darkrai Ross Cawthon, got 33rd at NAIC with this deck, and I actually think it's relatively decent. I don't think it's amazing, but I do think it has some potential, so I think it deserves its spot near the top of tier 3. The biggest problem with this deck is Spiritomb. Spiritomb causes lots of issues for this deck, so I would probably put at the top of tier 3. If Spiritomb didn't exist, its Arceus matchups would be 10 times better, so that is, kind of one concern as well. So I think top of tier 3 is fair, along with also United Wings. Alex Szymanski, Michael Bergerac, and a couple other players saw success with this deck at NAIC, but it does have some very, very big flaws. So put it at the top of tier 3. Fortress goes into fun tier. I'm sorry, Fortress is a fun deck though. It's cool. You can pull off some pretty gnarly combos, but I think deserves a spot in the fun tier. Gardevoir Klefki, I think, is probably a top of tier 3 deck. I think it's the weakest out of all the Gardevoir variants. I think it's just relatively average. I don't think it's necessarily better than any of the other Gardevoir variants. It's a little bit slower, a little bit more inconsistent as well, so there are some issues. Gardevoir. All right, Gardevoir, I think we're going to put at, I don't even think it's a tier S deck. I think that Gardevoir is probably, I think it deserves a spot here as the top of tier 1. I think it deserves a spot here. It's just amazing. It has it all. Can be anything. Reversal Energy is amazing. Refinement, Shining Arcana, you can draw 10-15 cards a turn. It's incredibly consistent, has great comeback potential, has almost unlimited power as well. It's just a fantastic deck. So we'll put it at the tier 1. However, there is some concern, especially in day 1 for players, playing in day 1, that the deck might not necessarily be able to finish enough games. So be concerned about that. And also, the one thing that is hurting this deck, I think, from being tier S right now, is that so many Arceus variants are trying to beat it. And that's something that's really, really concerning, is that a lot of these Arceus variants are playing things like Box of Disaster, Panic Mask, increasing Lost City counts or Path of the Peak counts. So you do run into some issues there, which is, something that I think you should be kind of concerned about. Gardevoir Mewtwo, I'm just going to put it kind of in the middle of tier 2. It's okay, not necessarily better than Gardevoir in any way, so I'm going to put that there. The Gardevoir Zacian. Now, this is interesting. This is going to be the top 32 list that Brent Tonneson and multiple other Australians played. Basically with double 4 Seal Stone, pretty much just Turbo Guardy pretty much. So I think Turbo Guardy is actually really good. It takes a much better Arceus matchup, but does sacrifice the mirror a little bit, and some of the Lost Box matchups are a little bit scary, but you do increase all your Arc matchups, which is really good. So I do think this deck probably deserves its spot in tier 2. Urshifu and Teleon, the deck that just won NAIC. Cyrus Davis, they were able to win the tournament, and I think the deck is good. I don't think it's as good as people think. I think that the deck does incredibly well versus players who might not necessarily know how to play versus it. However, if you do know how to play versus it, the deck can really end up struggling. Its Gardevoir matchup is not as good as some people might think. Its Lost on Tina matchup is also very scary, and the Arceus matchups can just brick you out of nowhere, and decks like Turbo Lost Box can beat you. You can pretty much beat anything, but you can also lose to anything, which is kind of the concern with this deck as of right now. Single Strike Lugia, particularly with the Urshifu, I think we're going to put as a tier 1 deck. I don't necessarily think it's better than all these other ones. I think we'll put it here. I think it's a solid deck. Once you get going, it's very easy to pilot as well, which is something that a lot of players, you know, like about the deck. Urshifu, though, is kind of an inconsistency card, so I think that that is one thing that's kind of holding the deck back a little bit as of right now. But when it gets going, it can beat pretty much anything except for Arctura. That matchup is still really rough, even with Urshifu. You have to kind of go first and get Urshifu out as soon as possible, which can be difficult as you don't have things that draw you tons of cards. So that's kind of an unfortunate thing. But the deck is still good, so I'll put it at tier 1. We have the colorless Lugia deck that has been seeing some success. Most recently won a late night series. I believe Gabriel Fernandez won a late night series of this deck. I don't think the deck is overwhelming in a way. I almost just think it's worse Lugia Single Strike, but I think it's good. I think it does have probably a better Lost Box matchup than Single Strike Lugia does, which is one thing going for it. But I do think some of the other matchups probably aren't as good, and you don't just have that power level, the ability to one-shot anything you would like at any point, like Single Strike Urshifu Lugia does. So that would be one thing I'd be a little bit concerned about. Lugia Tyranitar, this is going to be the version without Single Strike Urshifu. I am so I think this is the better version. However, the problem with Duraludon is that if there's a lot of Duraludon in day 1, this deck is going to struggle, which is the problem. You cut the Single Strike Urshifu line, but you gain so much consistency, which means that I think that this version is a little bit better. However, it is the riskier version. You increase your Lost Box matchup about 5 to 10% because you're able to fit in things like Second Collapse. Stone Journer is incredible as well. You increase your Gardevoir matchup as well just because you're more consistent. However, you do completely punt the Arc Duraludon matchup, which is kind of an issue. So I think that just the more vanilla variant of Lugia is slightly better, just barely though. So yeah, Lunarok, Meowscarada, all fun tier. I guess we'll just go through the fun tier right now. Stall also will go here. Spidops, Tinkaton, Zoroark. We'll just toss these all here. This is not in any particular order, so please don't hate me. And then I guess we'll also put Dialga here as well. And also Control. Sadly, Control. I don't necessarily know how good Control is as of right now. So I think we should put it right there. DT Mew just loses to Spiritomb, which is the problem. However, if no one plays Spiritomb, DT Mew is the better variant. So if you do want to high roll and hope that no one plays Spiritomb and they don't, you're actually played a better deck than Fusion, in my opinion. So I think it's probably top of tier 3. It's just so risky. It's so risky because any deck can pretty much just throw Spiritomb in and you don't really have a good answer. So I think that's the problem with the deck as of right now. Fusion Mew is tier 1. I think Fusion Mew is still very, very good. Probably at the bottom of tier 1. I don't think it's better than any of these other decks. Has decent matchups versus most things. The problem is it's very inconsistent. Can be a little bit high rolly at times. You'll have games where you completely explode and you feel like you're invincible. And then you'll have games where the deck just kind of collapses on itself. So that's a problem that the deck does have, which makes me want to put it towards the bottom of tier 1. However, you can pull off some pretty crazy plays and wipe people off the face of the earth very, very quickly with Turbo Meloetta. So it's strong, but does have some problems with consistency, which could put it in the top of tier 2, but I do think it has one of the highest ceilings. I would not be surprised if Fusion Mew won Worlds. It has an incredibly high ceiling. It just has that pop-off potential that a lot of decks don't necessarily have. So I think that it's a good all-in type deck that I think you could do well with. Miraidon Flaffy is, I think the Flaffy version is the best one, but I don't think they're great in any way. I think we'll put them both right here. They're solid decks. They're just not necessarily that powerful versus some of the top decks, but they do clean up on, you know, some of the lower decks for sure. But especially because Urshifu is rising back again in popularity, it's kind of an issue for it. And also Lugia is doing well, and they often play Stone Journer or Urshifu VMAX, which can cause problems. So yeah, I'll put that there. We have Palkia Bibarel and Palkia Curlia. I actually think Palkia Curlia is not terrible. I think the deck is relatively decent. Being able to use Arcana as well to pull off the Aqua Storm Kyogre is cool as well. So I think that deck actually has some potential. And then Ting Lu will put in top of tier 3. I think it's okay, but not necessarily overwhelming. But anyways, quite a balanced tier list. We see that, you know, there's not necessarily one except for tier 3 that has a lot more than the other. So I think we're in a pretty cool part, like I guess right now in the meta. It's pretty interesting, right? So yeah, anyways, shout out to Pess, the beginner as well, for making this tier list graph. I appreciate it, makes it easier for me. But anyways, let me know what you think of the tier list in the comments. No tier S deck as of right now. I think the meta is very, very balanced, so we'll have to see exactly what happens at Worlds. But anyways, that's gonna do it for me today. If you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I will be arriving in Yokohama over the next couple of days, so if you see me there, make sure to say hi as well. Cannot wait to compete, and I'm excited to be able to go to Japan. But anyways, that's gonna do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all the love and support as always. It means the world that you all come and hang out and watch my videos and like my content. So thank you so much. It really does mean more than you know. But anyways, this is Smart TCG. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll speak with you again soon. Peace out. If you're looking to improve your game, I do offer coaching on Metafy. I was ranked in the top 16 ranked players in the entire world, and I know what it takes to reach the next level. I have a free coaching consultation if you're interested in booking that, to kind of figure out exactly what coaching is and whether or not it is something for you. I also have individual sessions, event decklist preparation, replay reviews, training plans, and more. So if you have any questions, make sure to book that consultation if you're interested, and we can kind of go over exactly what coaching is and how it will make you into the very best player that you can possibly be. But with that being said, thank you so much for sticking around. I appreciate it. This is Smart TCG, and I'll speak with you all again soon. Thank you so much for the support. Peace.